There is a particular kind of man who builds things so quietly that the people living inside his work forget he is the one holding it all together. Rowan Sinclair was that man. For 47 years, he had moved through the world with the deliberate patience of someone who understood that the loudest crump person in the room is rarely the most powerful one. He built a commercial architecture firm in Chicago from a folding table in a rented garage and a drafting pencil he still kept in his desk drawer. He raised a daughter he would have traded every building he ever designed for. And he loved a woman who, as it turned out, had been quietly cataloging everything he owned long before she decided to leave. That was the part that would have broken most people. Not Rowan. Rowan had a different relationship with betrayal. He studied it, the way an engineer studies a crack in a load-bearing wall, not with panic. With measurement. On the first Saturday of November, at 6:42 in the morning, while the sky over Lake Michigan was still the color of wet concrete and the radiator in the kitchen was clicking through its slow morning warm-up, Celeste set a manila envelope beside his coffee cup and told him she wanted a divorce. She did not sit down. Psychologists call this a dominance cue. The person delivering difficult news remains standing to establish vertical authority over the person receiving it. Whether Celeste understood the mechanics of what she was doing or simply felt the instinct, the effect was the same. Rowan was seated. She was not. And the power in the room had been declared before a single word was spoken. She was already dressed, full makeup at 6 in the morning, hair pressed straight, a camel coat draped over her arm like she had somewhere important to be immediately after detonating her family. Rowan noticed all of it. He was the kind of man who cataloged details the way other people breathed, automatically and without conscious effort. "I want the penthouse," she said, "the Michigan Avenue office, the lake house in Lake Geneva, the investment accounts." She recited the list with the practiced rhythm of someone who had been rehearsing. "I have already spoken with an attorney." Rowan picked up his coffee. It had gone lukewarm. He drank it anyway. "And Nia?" he asked. Their daughter, 15 years old. Upstairs in her bedroom with charcoal on her fingertips and a sketchbook she never let anyone see, a girl who spoke mostly in observations and had her father's habit of watching rooms before entering them. Celeste paused. Not long, just enough to tell Rowan everything he needed to know about the weight she had assigned to the question. "Nia can stay with you. She does better with routine, and my schedule is about to change significantly." The sentence was structured to sound like thoughtful co-parenting. It was not. It was abandonment dressed in reasonable language. The kind of rationalization that allows a person to leave a child behind while still believing they are a good parent. Rowan had read about this in a behavioral psychology paper years ago. Moral disengagement. The ability to restructure harmful actions as acceptable through cognitive reframing. He had never expected to see it performed live at his own kitchen table. He said nothing. Celeste shifted her weight. She had expected resistance, anger, maybe tears. Silence was not on her list of anticipated responses, and it unsettled her the way unexpected stillness always unsettles people who have prepared for noise. "Did you hear what I said?" "I heard you." "And?" Rowan set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. Not with anger, not with pain, with the particular focused attention of a man who has just received a piece of information that confirms something he has suspected for a long time but had not yet been willing to name. "I'll have my attorney review the filing on Monday." That was it. No shouting, no bargaining, no performance. She stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then she pulled on her coat, checked her phone, and walked out the front door. The kitchen was quiet. The radiator clicked. Outside, a city bus hissed past on the wet street, its brakes releasing with that familiar Chicago exhale. From the hallway, just past the kitchen doorway, Rowan heard the creak of the third stair, the one that had been groaning since they moved in 7 years ago, and that he had never fixed because it served as a reliable early warning system for a teenager sneaking downstairs for midnight cereal. Nia was sitting on that step, sketchbook in her lap, charcoal pencil frozen mid-stroke. She had heard everything. Rowan looked at his daughter. She looked back, and in the space between them, Something shifted that would not shift back. The understanding, shared without a word, that the structure of their family had just been redesigned without their consent, and that the only people left inside it were the two of them. He walked to the staircase and sat down beside her on the step. The wood groaned under their combined weight. "Are you okay?" she asked him. He put his arm around her shoulders. "We're going to be fine," he said. He meant it, but not in the way she understood it. Not yet. If someone you trusted completely handed you a document designed to dismantle your life, would you fight it immediately? Handed you a document designed to dismantle your life? Would you fight it immediately? Or would you read it first, all of it, including the parts they assumed you would not understand? That difference, the space between reacting and responding, is where everything that follows was decided. Rowan Sinclair was not a man who reacted. He was a man who read the fine print. By Monday afternoon, he was seated across from Catherine Hale, a family law attorney on the 43rd floor of a LaSalle Street high-rise whose reputation rested on two things. She never lost her composure, and she never lost a case she had properly prepared for. She wore her reading glasses on a thin silver chain and had the habit of tapping her pen exactly 3 times before delivering an opinion. She read Celeste's petition in complete silence. Then she set it down, tapped her pen, and looked at Rowan over her glasses. "She is requesting the primary residence, the commercial office space, the Lake Geneva property, and roughly $6.2 million in liquid assets. That represents approximately 85% of your visible holdings." Rowan nodded once. "Give it to her." Catherine's pen stopped mid-tap. In 22 years of practice, she had heard clients say many things in that chair. This was not one of them. "Repeat that for me. Every asset she listed. Draft the agreement exactly as she has requested. The penthouse, the office, the lake house, the accounts, all of it." He leaned forward slightly. "With one condition. Celeste must voluntarily and permanently relinquish all parental rights and future legal claims to Nia. Full custody. No visitation schedule. No visitation schedule. No renegotiation clause. Irrevocable." Catherine studied him. She had a talent for reading clients the way architects read blueprints, structurally, looking for where the weight was and whether the foundation could hold it. "You understand that if she signs this, you are walking away from nearly everything you have built over 20 years. Rowan's expression did not change. "I am walking away from everything she can see." "Those are not the same thing." Catherine held his gaze for a long moment. Then she uncapped her pen and began to write. The divorce was finalized in 6 weeks. Celeste signed everything with a fountain pen she had purchased specifically for the occasion, a detail that told you everything about how she experienced the moment. She posted a photograph of herself outside the attorney's office, wind catching her hair, the Chicago skyline behind her, with a caption that read, "Closed that chapter. The next one is all mine." The man in the background of the photo, slightly out of focus but unmistakably present, was Kendrick Yates, 29 years old, personal trainer, the kind of jawline that photographs well from every angle. He had been seeing Celeste for approximately 8 months, which Rowan knew because he had noticed the change in her gym schedule, her new preference for overnight face serums, and the particular way she had begun angling her phone screen away from him when she texted. He had never confronted her about it, not because he lacked the evidence or the courage, because confrontation would have given her the opportunity to reframe the narrative, to cast herself as a woman trapped in an unfulfilling marriage, rather than a woman who had made a deliberate choice. Psychologists call this the victim reversal, the act of weaponizing accountability so that the person who caused the harm becomes the person claiming injury. Rowan would not give her that weapon. He and Nia moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. 3rd floor, narrow kitchen. A bay window in the living room that caught the late afternoon light in a way that made Nia immediately claim it as her drawing space. She set up her easel there the first night, before they had even unpacked the kitchen boxes. The apartment smelled like old paint and radiator dust. It was 1,200 square feet. It was not the penthouse. But the 3rd stair on the staircase outside their unit also creaked, and when Nia heard it on the first morning, she looked at Rowan and almost smiled. The transition was not smooth. It was not supposed to be. 3 weeks after they moved in, Nia came out of her room at 11 at night and found Rowan at the kitchen table with a bottle of ibuprofen and a heating pad pressed against his lower back. He had been diagnosed with degenerative disc disease 2 years earlier, a condition he managed with physical therapy, careful movement, and the kind of quiet, persistent pain management that becomes invisible to everyone around you because you have decided not to let it be visible. Nia stood in the doorway. How bad is it tonight? Manageable. That is not an answer. He looked at her. She was 15. She was too young to be monitoring her father's pain levels at 11 o'clock at night. She was doing it anyway. It is a 5, he said. Maybe a 6. It comes and goes. She crossed the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and set it beside the ibuprofen. Then, she sat down across from him. You let her take everything, Dad. Her voice was not angry. It was bewildered, the specific confusion of a young person attempting to reconcile the parent they know with the decision they witnessed. You just gave it to her. All of it. Why? Rowan was quiet for a moment. Because what she took is not what she thinks she took. That does not make sense. It will. She stared at him. He could see her trying to process it, turning the statement over the way she turned a sketch, looking for the angle that made the whole composition click. When, she asked. When it is time. She was not satisfied, but she trusted him. Not easily, not completely, but with the fragile, provisional trust of a teenager who has watched one parent leave and decided the remaining one has earned the benefit of the doubt. She went back to her room. He heard her pencil on paper through the thin wall. Drawing was how she processed what she could not yet say out loud. Rowan sat with the heating pad and the quiet and the slow understanding that the hardest part of his plan was not the legal architecture, it was the waiting, and a particular loneliness of carrying a strategy that required the people you love most to temporarily believe you have failed. Meanwhile, Celeste was building what she called her new life with the aggressive enthusiasm of someone furnishing a house they do not yet realize they cannot afford. She redecorated the penthouse entirely. Every room Rowan had designed, every piece of furniture he had chosen with the careful eye of a man who understood proportion and light, was replaced with items that were expensive and photographable and had no particular relationship to each other, beyond the fact that they had all been featured in the same design magazine. She hosted a housewarming party that she live-streamed to her growing social media audience. 38,000 followers watching her walk through rooms filled with white roses and champagne flutes and people whose names she had learned within the last calendar year. Kendrick stood near the kitchen island in a shirt that cost more than Rowan's monthly rent, laughing at something someone said about real estate. Celeste moved through the party the way certain people move through their own lives, as the protagonist of a story in which everyone else is a supporting character. She sent Nia a text that evening. Miss you, baby girl. Come visit soon. Love you always. Nia read it. She did not respond. Rowan saw the message on Nia's phone later that night, not because he was monitoring it, because Nia left it face up on the kitchen counter, screen still lit, in the way people leave things when they want someone else to see them without having to initiate the conversation. He read it. He said nothing. He understood what Celeste was doing. The intermittent reinforcement of affection. Unpredictable warmth deployed in small doses to maintain emotional connection without the commitment of actual presence. It is one of the most effective manipulation strategies in behavioral psychology, and one of the most damaging to a child still forming her understanding of what love is supposed to look like. He would not let it land. Not yet. Not until Nia was standing on solid enough ground to evaluate it herself. 4 months after the divorce, Rowan attended an industry dinner at a restaurant in the West Loop. A professional obligation he could not reasonably avoid. He was seated near the back, reviewing notes for a presentation the following morning, when the hostess led a party of 6 past his table. Celeste, Kendrick, 4 people. Rowan recognized his former clients, people who had hired his firm, attended his holiday gatherings, sent cards when Nia was born. Celeste saw him. And what happened next was not spontaneous. It was performed. The way she tilted her head, the slight widening of her smile, the half turn toward her companions that invited them into the moment. Oh, she said. Loud enough for the adjacent tables to register. Look who is still eating at the grown-up restaurants. A ripple of laughter. Small, polite. The kind people produce when they are not sure whether they are laughing with someone or at someone, but have decided not to examine the difference. Kendrick leaned in and said something close to her ear. She laughed brighter, performatively, the way laughter sounds when it is designed for an audience rather than a moment. Rowan looked at the faces around that table. People he had built things for. People whose offices bore his designs. One by one, he watched them choose complicity. Not maliciously, passively, which in the arithmetic of human decency often amounts to the same thing. He noted every face. Then he returned to his notes, finished his water, left cash on the table, and walked out into the November cold. What happens 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening in January, is the moment Celeste discovers that the ground beneath her new life has never been hers. Stay with me. Most people do not think about intellectual property when they think about architecture. They think about buildings, structures, glass, and steel, and the physical reality of a space you can walk through. But every building begins as a design, and a design is an idea. And an idea, when properly registered and legally protected, is property just as real as any structure that rises from it. Rowan Sinclair had understood this distinction since his first year of practice. It was the reason he had spent 18 months early in his marriage, establishing the Nia Sinclair Creative Trust, a legal entity that held the intellectual property rights to every original architectural design he had ever produced. The trust was named for a daughter who had been 3 years old at the time. Its custodian was Leonard Price, a 61-year-old IP attorney in Oak Park, who had the unhurried precision of a man who believed that the most important legal documents were the ones nobody thought to ask about. The penthouse Celeste now lived in had been designed by Rowan, not commissioned, not purchased from a catalog. Designed. Every wall angle, every window proportion, every structural detail was his original work. Registered under the trust, the same was true of the Michigan Avenue office and the Lake Geneva Lake House. Celeste owned the physical structures. She had never owned the designs embedded in them, which meant that any commercial use of those properties, renting them, selling them, using them as backdrops for sponsored content, licensing their images for any revenue-generating purpose, required authorization from the trust, authorization that had not been requested. The notice arrived at the penthouse on the Tuesday evening in January, not served dramatically, not delivered at a party, simply left with the doorman, who placed it in the mail slot alongside a Nordstrom catalog and a water bill. There is something almost surgical about that ordinariness, the understanding that the most consequential documents do not need theatrical delivery. They carry their own weight. Celeste opened it while heating leftover Thai food. She read it standing at the kitchen island, barefoot, one hand still holding a pair of chopsticks, a notice of intellectual property infringement, a cease and desist order regarding unauthorized commercial use of protected architectural designs, and an itemized invoice totaling $642,000. She laughed, the same reflexive, defensive laugh of someone who has not yet processed what they are reading. She photographed the document and texted it to her attorney with a single word. Seriously? Her attorney called back in 14 minutes. The conversation lasted 9. When it ended, Celeste set the phone on the counter and stood very still. Kendrick came in from the gym 40 minutes later. He found her sitting on the couch in the dark living room, the document on the coffee table, the Thai food untouched and cooling in its containers. He read it. He read it again. Then he asked a question that, in its specificity, revealed exactly what his priorities had been from the beginning. Does this affect the property value? Celeste looked at him, and in that look, if she had been willing to see it clearly, was the answer to a question she had never thought to ask about the man she had left her family for, whether his presence in her life was contingent on the life itself or on her. She was not willing to see it. Not yet. The hearing was scheduled for March. Celeste filed a counter-motion arguing that the IP claims were retaliatory and that the designs had been created during the marriage, which should classify them as marital property. Her attorney presented the argument with confidence. It was well structured. It was also wrong. The courtroom on the morning of the hearing had that particular institutional stillness that precedes information nobody in the room is fully prepared to receive. The sound of paper being arranged, the low murmur of attorneys conferring, the mechanical hum of the HVAC system doing its invisible, constant work. Celeste arrived in a charcoal suit with Kendrick 2 steps behind her. She looked composed. She had posted a photograph in the courthouse elevator that morning with the caption, "Standing on what is mine." Rowan was already seated when she entered. Navy suit, leather portfolio, hands folded, the same posture he brought to every meeting, client dinner, and design review he had ever attended. Calm not his performance but his infrastructure. The load-bearing quality of a man who has built his composure the way he builds his buildings, from the foundation up. Leonard Price sat in the gallery. Gray-haired, reading glasses, briefcase on his lap. He acknowledged no one. Celeste's attorney argued for 35 minutes. Marital property precedent, joint contribution doctrine, community asset theory. She was thorough and articulate and operating from a framework that assumed the designs were marital property because they had been created during the marriage. Catherine Hale stood when it was her turn. She opened the portfolio, removed a single bound document, and placed it on the bar table with the quiet confidence of someone presenting evidence they have verified 17 times. Your Honor, the intellectual property in question was registered under the Nia Sinclair Creative Trust 4 years prior to the creation of any of the disputed designs. The trust instrument establishes that all original architectural works produced by Mr. Bolt Sinclair held as trust assets for the sole benefit of his daughter. These works were never classified as personal or marital property. They exist outside the marital estate entirely. She paused. Mrs. Sinclair owns 3 physical structures designed by my client. She is entitled to inhabit them. She is not entitled to commercially exploit the protected designs embedded in them. The unauthorized use, including but not limited to sponsored social media content filmed inside these properties, generating revenue from copyrighted architectural work, constitutes infringement under federal intellectual property law. The judge reviewed the trust instrument. He took his time. The courtroom clock moved through nearly a full minute of silence. The kind of silence that has texture, that you can feel settling over a room like snowfall. Quiet and irreversible. He removed his glasses. The trust is properly executed, predates the marriage, and the IP registrations are valid and current. The designs in question are not marital assets. They are trust property held for the benefit of a minor child. He looked at Celeste. Mrs. Sinclair, you may occupy the structures in question. However, any commercial use, including digital content creation, rental income, or resale marketing that incorporates the protected designs, requires written authorization from the trust. The outstanding invoice for unauthorized use is valid and enforceable. The clerk read the amount into the record, $642,000. Celeste's hands went flat on the table. Her breathing changed. The composure she had carried into the courtroom, the curated confidence of the elevator selfie, the charcoal suit, the practiced posture, all of it left her in a single, visible wave. Not dramatically. The way color leaves a face when the body registers information before the mind has caught up. Behind her, in the gallery, Kendrick stood. He did not rush forward. He did not call her name. He straightened his jacket with the precise, unhurried movements of a man adjusting his position before an exit he has already decided to make. "I need to step out," he said to no one in particular. His voice was level and contained and entirely free of the emotional weight that a sentence like that should carry when spoken in the presence of someone you claim to love who is falling apart in real time. He walked up the aisle, pushed through the courtroom doors, and did not come back. The sound of those doors closing, the soft mechanical click of the latch catching, settled over the room like a period at the end of a very long, very complicated sentence. Celeste stared at the empty doorway. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm. In attachment theory, there is a concept called protest behavior. It is the desperate, disorganized response a person produces when a bond they depended on is suddenly severed. It is not rational. It is not dignified. It is the raw, animal recognition that you are alone in a way you did not anticipate and that the architecture of your safety has just been removed. Celeste did not produce protest behavior. She produced something worse: silence. The total, absolute quiet of a person who has run out of narrative, who has reached the end of the story they were telling themselves and found nothing on the other side of it. Rowan was gathering his papers. He exchanged a word with Catherine. He stood. He moved toward the door with the steady, unhurried gait of a man with somewhere to be, and the full intention of arriving there intact. He did not look at Celeste. That was the part that reached her. Not the invoice, not Kendrick's exit, not the judge's ruling. The fact that Rowan Sinclair, the man she had handed a manila envelope over morning coffee, the man she had mocked in a restaurant full of people who owed him their office spaces, did not find her worth a final glance. What happens in the hallway outside that courtroom is the conversation that changes everything. Keep listening. The hallway smelled like floor polish and recycled heat. Every courthouse in America has the same scent, the institutional blend of consequence and procedure. Rowan was 15 steps from the elevator when he heard it. Rowan, not shouted, not projected, spoken at the volume of someone whose voice has lost its scaffolding and can only manage the bare minimum of sound required to form a name. He turned. Celeste stood in the hallway. Her attorney had remained near the courtroom doors, granting the moment the professional distance of someone who understood when to withdraw. The charcoal suit that had looked so deliberate 3 hours earlier now appeared only as evidence of a version of herself she could no longer locate. She pressed one hand against the wall, steadying herself physically in the way people do when they have lost the ability to steady themselves in every other way. I was wrong. Her voice cracked on the second word. About everything. About what mattered. About you. She swallowed. Please, let me work something out. I will sell things. I will figure out the payments. Just give me time. Rowan stood still. He looked at her for a long moment. What was in his face was not anger, not satisfaction, not even sadness exactly. It was the settled, permanent weight of a man who had loved someone for years and had spent even longer arriving at a clear understanding of who that person was. You took everything you could count, he said. His voice was low and even. The properties, the accounts, the visible pieces. You took them because you believed that was the wealth. He paused. But the one thing I would have traded all of it for, our daughter, you left behind. You told me her routine was inconvenient for your new schedule. You framed abandoning your child as a logistical decision. Celeste opened her mouth. She was on the stairs, Celeste. That morning, she heard everything. She heard you reduce her to a scheduling conflict. His jaw tightened. Once. Briefly. That is the thing I cannot architect my way past. He pressed the elevator button. I hope you find what you are building toward. He said it the way you say something when you've reached the end of your willingness to carry someone else's choices. Not cruelly, not kindly. Finished. The elevator opened. He stepped in. The doors closed. Nia was in the lobby. Rowan had told her to stay home. She had been sitting in the back seat of the car that morning when he came out of the apartment, sketchbook in her lap, headphones around her neck, looking straight ahead with the quiet, immovable certainty of a teenager who has made a decision and does not intend to discuss it. She was on a bench near the window, drawing something. She looked up the moment the elevator opened. There was a pause, a held breath. Then she crossed the lobby and put her arms around her father. Not briefly, not obligatorily, the kind of embrace that communicates a shift in the bedrock of a relationship, something fundamental rearranging itself into a new and permanent configuration. Rowan brought his hand to the back of her head. Steady, present, the way he had always been present, even through the months when she could not see it. I did not understand what you were doing, she said into his shoulder. Her voice was thick. I thought you gave up. I thought you just let her win. She pulled back enough to look at him. Her eyes were bright and red-rimmed and entirely clear. You did not give up. You gave her exactly what she asked for. And you kept the only thing that mattered. Rowan placed both hands on her shoulders. Some designs only make sense when you see the whole blueprint, he said. She almost laughed. It came out uneven, half sob, half relief. The sound of someone releasing a weight they had been carrying for months without permission to set it down. They walked out of the courthouse together into the gray Chicago afternoon. March wind off the lake, sharp and cold and completely alive. The city moving around them with its usual indifference to the private turning points happening inside its buildings. The weeks that followed unfolded with the quiet precision of something that had been designed correctly from the beginning. Through the Nia Sinclair Creative Trust, administered by Leonard Price with the meticulous attention to detail that had defined his 40-year career, the intellectual property rights to every design embedded in Celeste's properties were formally enforced. The penthouse could not be sold without authorization from the trust. The office space could not be leased. The lake house could not be listed. Every sponsored post Celeste had filmed inside those spaces became a documented instance of infringement. Celeste's financial situation deteriorated with the mechanical inevitability of a structure whose foundation has been removed. The liquid assets went to legal fees first. The jewelry was sold quietly. The car, a white Range Rover that had featured prominently in her social media aesthetic, was returned to the dealership. Kendrick Yates resurfaced briefly on social media with a new client, a woman in Scottsdale with a home gym and a recently finalized divorce of her own. Celeste saw the posts. She said nothing publicly. Privately, she stopped posting for 11 days. In the economy of social media, 11 days of silence is a funeral. She reached out to Nia once in late April. A voicemail. Her voice was unsteady in the way voices become when a person has tried several times to record something and has finally settled for the version that is merely imperfect rather than the one that is honest. I love you. I know I made mistakes. I am so sorry, baby. Please call me back. Nia listened to it sitting at her easel by the bay window. The late afternoon light was doing that thing it does in Chicago in spring, cutting through the clouds at a low angle and turning everything briefly, almost aggressively gold. She played the voicemail once more. She sat with it, not in anger, not in bitterness, in the careful, evaluative stillness of a young woman who has spent the last 5 months learning from her father's example that the first response is not always the right one. Then she called back. Celeste answered on the first ring. Nia listened to her mother speak for 4 minutes. The words were familiar. Love, mistakes, sorry, please. The vocabulary of someone seeking readmission to a life they voluntarily exited. When Celeste finished, there was a long silence. The kind that exists between two people who once shared a home and now share only the memory of it. Mom, Nia said. Her voice was calm and clear and carried the particular weight of a sentence that has been composed over many weeks. You chose your freedom. I am choosing mine. She ended the call, set the phone beside her paint water, picked up her brush, went back to work. Some evenings arrive without announcement. No particular event, no dramatic resolution, just a shift in the quality of the air inside a small apartment, a lightness that was not there before, as though something heavy has been quietly set down and the room has expanded slightly to fill the space it left behind. That was the Tuesday Rowan ordered Thai food, green curry for himself, pad see ew for Nia, because she had been on a noodle phase for 3 weeks, and he had learned long ago that the noodle phases were non-negotiable. They ate at the kitchen counter because the table was covered with Nia's portfolio pieces for a summer art program at the School of the Art Institute she had applied to, without telling him, and been accepted to, without telling him, and finally revealed by leaving the acceptance letter on his pillow. Like a hotel mint, she was describing a mixed media piece she was developing for the program's entrance showcase. Something about urban architecture and negative space and the way buildings hold memory in their proportions. She was talking with her hands the way she always talked about art, quickly, precisely, her eyes carrying that particular quality of internal light that appears in a person when they are describing the thing they were put on this earth to love. Rowan was listening the way he always listened, fully, without performing it. The way people who have survived something real learn to be present in ordinary moments because they understand, at actual cost, that ordinary moments are the material life is actually made of. He reached for his water and shifted slightly as the familiar ache in his lower back moved through him. a slow, grinding pulse that had become so routine he sometimes forgot it was not simply the way a body was supposed to feel. Nia stopped mid-sentence. "Dad." He looked up. Scale of 1 to 10. Her voice was careful, not worried, attentive. The voice of someone who has decided they're old enough to share the weight of the people they love and has further decided that pretending the weight does not exist is not an option. 4, he said. Maybe 5. It is a 4 to 5 kind of evening. She held his gaze. Actual number. He set down his water, folded his hands on the counter, and for the first time in a very long time, answered the question honestly. 6, but a manageable 6. The physical therapy is working. The new regimen is helping. I am not hiding it from you anymore. He looked at her steadily. No more blueprints you cannot see, not between us. Everything is on the table now. Nia was quiet for a moment, processing, filing. The way she processed everything, with the slow, thorough attention of someone who believes that understanding requires patience. "How long did you know?" she asked. "Before everything with Mom." "How long were you planning it?" Rowan leaned back carefully against the counter. "The trust was established when you were 3. The IP registrations were filed continuously over the following 12 years. The specific strategy for the divorce was structured over 6 weeks. But the awareness that it might one day be necessary, that has been with me for longer than I am comfortable admitting." He paused. "Being in pain has a way of clarifying what matters. When your body reminds you daily that you are not permanent, you stop investing in things that are not going to outlast you. You invest in the things that will." He looked at his daughter. "You were the only item on that list." The radiator clicked. The refrigerator hummed its low, constant note. Outside, a siren moved through the distance, rose and faded. The city settling into its evening sounds. Nia picked up her glass of water. She held it out. Rowan looked at it. Then he picked up his own. "To the blueprint," she said. They touched glasses. The sound was small and clear and entirely unremarkable, and somehow, in the quiet of that kitchen, it was the most important sound either of them had heard in a very long time. Later, after the containers went into the recycling, and Nia had retreated to the bay window with her sketchbook and her earbuds, and the focused, absorbed silence that meant she was working on something she cared about, Rowan stood at the kitchen window. The Chicago night was doing what Chicago nights do in spring. Dark sky, city glow, the lake somewhere out there beyond the buildings, invisible but present. The way the most important things usually are. He thought about the sequence of events that had led to this kitchen, the manila envelope on the table, the restaurant and the laughter he had cataloged, the courtroom and the hallway and the elevator doors closing, the walk into the afternoon with his daughter beside him. He had spent his life designing structures, understanding load paths, stress points, the invisible forces that determine whether a building stands or falls. He knew that the most critical element of any structure is not the part you can see, it is the foundation, the part buried beneath everything else, holding the weight of every wall and window and room above it, unseen and unacknowledged and absolutely essential. That was what he had protected. Not the penthouse, not the office, not the lake house, or the accounts, or any of the visible, photographable, postable evidence of a life well built. The foundation. He turned back toward the apartment, toward the bay window where his daughter's silhouette was bent over her sketchbook, the pencil moving in steady, confident strokes, building something new on paper the way her father had always built things in the world. Carefully, patiently, from the ground up. Celeste had believed she was taking everything. She had taken the structure. She had left behind the land it stood on, the designs that gave it meaning, the daughter who would inherit it all, and the man who had been quietly holding every piece in place since before she arrived. She had left behind the only things that were still going to be standing when everything else was gone. Rowan turned off the kitchen light and sat down in the chair by the window, close enough to hear the faint scratch of charcoal on paper, and let the evening settle around him like something that had finally, after a very long time, been properly designed. This story leaves behind 3 things worth remembering. Not on a phone you will replace in 2 years, but somewhere more permanent than that. First, protect what cannot be replaced by making it legally invisible to the people who might try to take it. If you have built something, a business, a body of creative work, a savings account meant for your children. Call your attorney this week and ask a single question. Is this structured to survive a crisis? One conversation. One afternoon. That is how legacy is actually secured. Second, the person who diminishes you publicly has already made their position clear. You do not owe continued access to anyone who performs at your expense. Rowan noted the faces at that restaurant. He did not confront them. He did not need to. He simply stopped designing buildings for people who had laughed while he was in the room. Third, the most enduring thing you will ever give your child is not money or property or even stability. It is the memory of watching you refuse to collapse. Your children are learning right now, in this season, from the way you carry what has been placed on you. The composure you maintain under pressure is the inheritance that compounds across generations. Celeste took everything she believed defined a successful life. She left behind the only things that actually did. What Rowan builds next, and the part of the story Celeste still does not know she is inside of, is only beginning. And this time, he will not be building in silence. If this story moved you, send it to the person who needs to hear it tonight. And stay close. The next chapter of Rowan and Nia's story is on its way.